Here's the thing. At one point or another, we're all gonna die. It's the exact way and time, which tends to be the tricky part. But what if I told you there's a good chance we know what's gonna kill us? A chance which can be actively minimized by, owning your health. All aboard the longevity train. Yo! What is up? Welcome back to another week of How to Health. My name is Kevin. I run liftandbalance.com, where we take aim at all things health and longevity and do it in an odd, weird, interesting, and highly sarcastic way. Today, I am here to tell you that we know one of the favorite cards that Grim Reaper dude likes to use. And it's a doozy. A silent but deadly tactic which does not affect us over the course of weeks to months, but instead, years to decades. A condition which accounts for 1 in 4 adult deaths in the United States, killing more Americans than any other disease. This grim reaping, which the majority of us will face if we are on this beautiful floating rock long enough, is heart disease, or the chronic buildup of dysfunction across the vast and precise cardiovascular system. The system which, if fully spread out, would circle the world twice. And in case you were wondering, because I certainly was, that is 60,000 miles of blood vessels. The system which transports vital nutrients and that kind of important oxygen thing throughout the body for all of our organs and tissues, allowing them to function and, better yet, sustain life. And finally, a system which starts succumbing to disease and dysfunction as early as our 20s. Yes, you heard that right, 20s. But again, in a silent way, slowly accumulating over decades while ever slightly increasing one's risk, probability, and likelihood of an event. An event, unlike a T-Swift concert, no one is looking forward to. Not a pretty picture. I know. And we haven't even got to the worst part. The fact that the testing that overseeing bodies have coined best practices not only tells us very little about true risk, but also fails to adapt to new research and data in a time-appropriate manner. No! You mean large overseeing bodies are not all over the new and emerging science and adjusting their guidelines accordingly? I don't believe it. Sorry. Couldn't help it. As there are 2 simple yet outside standard protocol tests, which provide a much better look into one's current and future risk. So, we're going to talk about them, because these are simple add-ons to a standard lipid panel that can make all the difference. And as you know from all our other longevity powwows on this channel, the secret to short-term prosperity and long-term vitality is prevention, prevention, prevention. And that statement may not be more true for any disease than it is with cardiovascular disease. So the 2 markers we will be discussing today are apolipoprotein B and lipoprotein a. And I have some good news. For one of these, you'll likely only have to measure it once, because you either have the elevated risk or you don't. See? Making it easy. Now, here's why they're important. Both of these markers have been independently shown to increase one's risk of cardiovascular disease, meaning elevated levels of these 2 on their own will increase one's risk independent of all other risk factors. AKA, if they are elevated, you want to get them not elevated. And I'll tell you why. But first, let me explain why the current measurements we use are less than helpful. Atherogenic cardiovascular disease is a condition where lipoproteins, specifically low-density lipoprotein and very low-density lipoprotein, venture beneath the endothelial cells which make up our blood vessel walls. It's important to note right off the bat that lipoproteins are not cholesterol. They are cholesterol and triglyceride transporters, meaning there is no cholesterol moving around our body without them. Remember this. Now, anywhere from rarely to frequently, depending on the biological circumstance, these cholesterol-carrying particles can become damaged or oxidized by unstable compounds called free radicals. And when this happens, the endothelium sends a 911 signal to rally the immune system. like medics rushing to the scene of a biological accident. And like any good first responder, the immune system neutralizes the situation, engulfing the damaged lipoprotein to prevent any further damage. However, there is no convoy back to the hospital. This engulfed lipoprotein is now stuck beneath the blood vessel wall for life. And if this happens a lot, these immune-engulfed lipoproteins begin to form atherosclerotic plaques. And if you play this on repeat for a few decades, bada bing, bada boom, we have heart disease. Or worse, a sudden cardiovascular event. Now, typically it's been shown that low-density lipoproteins have a higher likelihood of traveling into this intermediary space and getting stuck. But the way we measure these cholesterol carriers reminds me of the legendary Smash Mouth line, "I ain't the sharpest tool in the shed," if I were the governing bodies overseeing the standards. I think that made sense. These standards are the General Lipid Panel, which directly measures total cholesterol, triglycerides, and HDL cholesterol, while providing a calculation for LDL cholesterol. And you may be asking, why calculate it? Where the establishment would say, why the hell not? But seriously, the real reason is because it's an additional, slightly more expensive test. Pretty amazing, right? And just so we have our taxonomy down, LDLC refers to the number of cholesterol particles on a LDL protein in a blood sample. HDLC is the number of cholesterol particles on a HDL protein in a blood sample. Total cholesterol are those two numbers combined plus 20% of your triglycerides, and triglycerides are the total concentration of fatty acids along for the ride. Now, traditionally, it has been the LDL and triglyceride numbers which have been associated with an elevated risk of cardiovascular disease. However, this can be very misleading, as these numbers are only looking at the total cholesterol and triglycerides within a blood sample, but not necessarily how many carriers of cholesterol there are, aka lipoproteins. Remember, it is the lipoproteins which get stuck. Thus, we want to know how many lipoproteins we have shuttling these higher risk cholesterol particles. That is where ApoB comes into play. This is a protein which is found on the surface of lipoprotein particles, including all LDL and VLDL cholesterol particles. We can get a really good understanding of how many atherogenic particles we have. And by using the simple laws of probability, we can infer that the more you have, the more opportunity there is for cardiovascular dysfunction to occur. And that's what the data displays as well. Thus, we want to keep that ApoB number low, pretty much as low as possible. And as we saw in this review here, our ApoB numbers can help predict the risk of a cardiovascular event decades in advance, something that standard markers on lipid panels have failed to strongly predict. In fact, there are scenarios where an individual can have perfect results on a standard panel, all within reference range, and be at an elevated risk because ApoB is off the charts, and they don't even know about it. So you want to measure the number of atherogenic particles, rather than just the cholesterol which is found on them. The American Heart Association recommends that individuals with no history of cardiovascular disease should aim for ApoB levels below 90 milligrams per deciliter. But as with many standard guidelines, they correlate with the average of an increasingly sick population. So ideally, it is good to aim to get this number lower. And we'll talk potential ways to do that in just a little. But first, we must now talk about the one and done, which is lipoprotein a. This is a lipoprotein particle which contains both ApoB and a unique protein called lipoprotein a. And for whatever reason, this lipoprotein likes to spend much of its time beneath the endothelial blood cell wall, much more than all the other non-little a lipoproteins. And that right there has it implicated with additional and significant pro-inflammatory and thrombotic properties that contribute to cardiovascular disease independent of LDL cholesterol, accelerating the formation of plaques and thus cardiovascular risk. I know, not cool. And here's the thing, LPa is a genetic variant, which means that its production and levels in the blood are highly determined by an individual's genes. So typically, you have it or you don't. So testing one time is sufficient. A one-time thing that is super advantageous to test early rather than in your 4th, 5th, 6th decade of life. Because by then, the event could be imminent. Remember, prevention, prevention, prevention. Ideally, you want levels of LPa below 50 milligrams per deciliter. So ask your doctor to run both of these tests along with your standard lipid panel to truly understand your current risk of this top killer. And also to set a baseline to track if any of your interventions are moving the needle. What interventions, you ask? First, let's talk about some additional factors, tools, and tests to keep in mind. Beginning with if you have a history of cardiovascular disease in your immediate or extended family. Because if you do, that is a major reason to test early and often, as there could be a few factors at play. One being a genetic predisposition, and the other being the fact that family members typically follow similar habits. Habits which could be influencing risk in the wrong direction. Either way, family history of things such as heart attacks, hypertension, and cardiovascular disease are super helpful to know. Another good gauge to keep your eye on is overall cardiovascular endurance and aerobic capacity. These reflect the ability of your heart, lungs, and muscle to deliver oxygen and nutrients to the body during physical activity. And although there are official ways to measure this, such as a VO2 max test, much simpler and straightforward observations could be useful, like your tendency to become winded quickly, whether it be carrying groceries in from the car or walking up a few flights of stairs. And you guys remember how beneficial walking is, right? If this is you, it's probably a sign that it is a good time to start taking back control of your most valuable asset, your health. Additional tests which can be helpful, especially if your blood work has been flagged high in one of these areas, are calcium scans and CT coronary angiograms. These are doctor-prescribed, non-invasive tests which explore if and how much the critical arteries supplying blood to the heart have plaque formation. However, they too are not bulletproof. They simply add to the bulletin board of data you can use to assess your risk. Now, all of this is great, but at the same time, pretty damn useless unless you take action. The art of doing, as I like to call it, is a powerful practice. And even if your numbers are perfect, that doesn't mean it's smart to forget about it and circle back in 10 years. There is no better time to start or continue slowing down the progression of cardiovascular disease than right now. Because eventually, if you live long enough, the odds say it will likely be your last adversary. That is, until AI turns on us. But I think we have a good 10 years until that happens, hopefully. So with that, let's talk about what you can do. The name of the game, my friends, is prevention and early detection. If you have longevity in mind, or living as healthy as humanly possible for as long as possible, today is the day to start. And here are some guidelines to noodle on no matter your age or health status. First, perform a lipid screening yearly, focusing on the key markers we discussed before, especially ApoB and LPa. And although we kinda trashed them before, getting the other measurements are helpful too, including a particle size analysis. Remember, these are not standard tests, so you're gonna have to specifically ask your doctor for them. Review these results with your medical professional and address your risk accordingly. If they come back high, talk about your plan to get them back in check. ApoB has been shown to be more responsive to lifestyle interventions than LPa. So if LPa is flagged high, it's worth going to a specialist to further address your risk and build a plan accordingly. Often, this will include a combination of lifestyle habits and pharmaceutical agents such as a statin. Understand that building healthy lifestyle habits early is literally one of the best and most impactful things that you can do. Focusing on things such as real food, structured meal timing, high-quality sleep, daily badonkadonking, and stress management, while eliminating controllable risk factors such as smoking, alcohol, ultra-processed foods, and ultra-sedentary behavior, all of which we cover in deep dives across this channel, the links of which you can find in the show notes below. These habits can not only reduce circulating ApoB, but also reduce free radicals and inflammation, the other necessary components for atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. It's like attacking on all fronts. Like I mentioned way back in the intro, with cardiovascular disease, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So let's stack the odds ever in our favor and push that when out as far as humanly possible. Not only reaping the benefits of long-term vitality, but feeling effing awesome in the here and now. Being our best for not only ourselves, but the people we love. And, most importantly, locking in those T-Swift concert tickets for the next 80 years. What? Just saying.